This term addicted to dopamine, there is no evidence about being addicted to dopamine. We all have dopamine.
I hear people all the time saying, I'm getting a dopamine hit, or my dopamine's a bit low, or I need a dopamine detox.
Should we ban the word dopamine on social media as I propose?
I don't want to ban anything. If you schedule such that you only look at your phone, for an hour a day, those things might be very good for you, but it isn't the case that we think that that's because dopamine levels are falling when you stop doing that.
Masud, hello. It's lovely to see you.
Lovely to be here.
Can we start with dopamine sort of in the conversation? I feel like now I hear people all the time saying, I'm getting a dopamine hit, or my dopamine's a bit low, or I need a dopamine detox. Do you notice this as a dopamine scientist?
Absolutely. I think it's everywhere. But it's important also to think about how much is based on the science and how much is based on mythology. And I feel like there's a lot more mythology than science in what we're hearing, especially in different types of events like podcasts. So I think it's important to get back to the science and what we really know about dopamine.
This seems like a good moment to get back to the basics. What is dopamine? Mm-hmm. Where does it come from? How is it made? What does it function? Give us the day one, week one lecture.
Okay. We use different types of chemicals in the brain to communicate between neurons, the nerve cells in the brain. And dopamine is one of those neurotransmitters, one of those chemicals. It doesn't just do one thing. Dopamine is involved in several circuits in the brain, which may be involved in different types of functions. One of those functions is movement. We could talk a little bit about what happens when you don't have enough dopamine because your movements might alter. Another function is actually in terms of what we would call working memory, short-term memory, and regulation of cognitive control. The one function that I think has seized everybody, though, is about the role of dopamine and its effects on reward and motivation.
Can we just go back to the idea of how it functions as a molecule?
Yeah.
I guess I'm asking you to explain what a neurotransmitter is.
Yeah.
That's another word we all use the whole time. We know about serotonin, we know about dopamine.
So
what do they do?
Nerve cells communicate with each other through these neurotransmitters. When an electrical signal gets to one end of a nerve, a neurotransmitter is released, which engages receptors on the nerve cell which it communicates with. The circuits that I'm talking about are the sort of connections of nerve cells which are involved in a particular function in the brain. And we've been able to dissect out many of these circuits through studies over the last 50, 60 years.
When you discuss how dopamine works, we're talking about extremely small quantities released from the end of one nerve, and they pass across a tiny little gap and they hit another nerve and set off an electrical impulse in that other nerve. In the discourse, we talk about these spikes and lows as if dopamine is more of a sort of thing bathing the entire brain as a hormone might. Is there a sort of generalized role of dopamine that we measure the levels going up and down? Or is it happening much more microscopic scale only?
It's really working at that microscopic nanomole scale. We need to get away from the idea there's some kind of dopamine reservoir. Our neurons aren't bathing in dopamine. When we come to talk about detox or something like this, it's not as if you stop doing something, that reservoir will slowly reduce and then you get to some safe levels. We all have dopamine.
That to me is a really important concept, that there are certain things in the body where you can have too much or too little hormones, blood, iron, but these neurotransmitters aren't like that. They are functioning at a very microscopic, specific, highly localized way.
Why do we have dopamine for one kind of a circuit, serotonin for another? Why do we have different ones?
That's a very good question, Xand. I don't think we have a clear understanding of why, but it seems to be that dopamine has been evolutionarily conserved. So if you go back to the lamprey, which is the oldest vertebrate, it survived 360 million years. And in lampreys, dopamines are very important in terms of motivating action. And motivating action in the lamprey is about, getting food, having sex. So we know about dopamine being around for 360 million years, at least, probably. Why it's used for this particular function and why another chemical like serotonin is not, I don't think we know.
So Masud, talk a bit more then about how in normal function dopamine works with motivation and reward. What's going on? How do those circuits work? What's dopamine up to?
Mm-hmm. So we know that dopamine can be released as a burst. It's sometimes called a phasic signal.
A lot of neurons at once releasing dopamine to a lot of other
for a
neurons.
short time. And one of its roles is this bursting can occur when an unexpected reward occurs.
So when a good thing happens, you get a burst of dopamine subsequent to the good thing.
When you weren't expecting it to be good.
Okay.
But I just want to qualify this because most of this work has been done in animals and we're making these inferences to humans. There is a little bit of evidence in humans as well that we get these dopamine bursts with unexpected rewards, but the evidence is much stronger in animals.
In a sense, the interesting thing is not the dopamine. The interesting thing is the particular circuit in the brain where a neurotransmitter is released. There's some neural activity. The fact of it being dopamine is in a sense neither here nor there.
It just happens to be dopamine in the system.
And which system is this happening in?
So this is a system where the dopamine neurons are in the brainstem. It's called the part of the midbrain. The actual area is the ventral tegmental area, the VTA, and it sends a dopamine burst up towards the basal ganglia and also to the cortex, but it's the signal to the basal ganglia that's very, very important.
So how does it link then to future behaviour? A good thing unexpected happens. I give you some tasty food. Would that be an example?
Yes, but there might be some cue before that. You might say, I'm going to cook for you today. And it turns out that what you cook for me is much better than I expected.
Okay.
So next time you say that to me, I'm going to cook for you. I'm going to, okay. So I'm expecting this to be a good event. And what we know in animals is that dopamine burst that we get when we get the unexpected reward, on subsequent occasions, that dopamine burst will occur when you say that to me, because it's now transferred to the cue, the expectation that Chris is going to cook something great for me.
So the first time we have a drink of alcohol or we smoke a cigarette, I mean, a lot of this is the context of, I guess, addiction or quasi-addictive behaviours.
Yes.
The first time we get that is when we actually have the substance, the reward itself.
Yeah.
But subsequently, it will be when we enter the pub or when we see the pack of cigarettes, we get the advertisement.
And I think it's really important here to mention that, when you first have that unexpected pleasure, the dopamine burst itself is not what gives you the pleasure. All it's doing is telling you this was unexpected and it's good. So it's a teaching signal.
It's fair to say, Masud, that dopamine is more than a bit of a fad on social media. People talk about dopamine hits, dopamine spikes, and they use it in the context of everything from sugar to scrolling to, notifications. How accurate is that idea?
So remember again, I'm going to qualify that no one's measured humans' dopamine levels while you're looking at a phone.
Really?
Yeah. So what has been measured is that, when you might be playing a video game, and you're getting pleasure from playing that video game, you're getting rewarding outcomes from playing that video game, we can show that the levels of dopamine appear to increase. There are good reason to believe that dopamine is released in the same way when we get rewarding outcomes, but there's no good reason to believe that dopamine itself gives you the pleasure. So the distinction is a little nuanced, but it's about the fact that dopamine is teaching you that this is a rewarding experience. So in terms of social media and scrolling, as far as I know, there is no evidence that you are getting any dopamine bursts.
When we're doing any of those things that are sticky and hard to disengage from, how are these reward circuits working, or how should we think about dopamine in that context, and what do we know? Yeah.
One thing to think about is the stuff we know from addiction. And in drug addiction, what happens is that if you see cues that remind you of the rewarding experience you might get, that can lead to that dopamine burst, which is telling you there is a rewarding outcome associated with this sensory stimulus. Many researchers feel that is important in craving.
And craving is motivation, is very strong
craving
motivation?
Is motivation. Sometimes people call it incentive salience. So something becomes very incentivized, salient for you, attractive. It's a pull, even if you don't necessarily get pleasure from it, because they have these sensory cues which drive them, attract them to the outcome that they want.
That feels like such an important distinction between the motivation, the wanting, and this kind of myth of pleasure, that there's lots of these things, whether it is scrolling social media or more extreme forms of drug addiction. Often the activity itself is far less pleasurable than we end up saying it is.
And the literature suggests there's a dissociation between wanting, feeling the need to go and get something, and liking, actually getting the pleasure from it.
And is the wanting, are you feeling your dopamine surge then?
The evidence that that dopamine surge is associated with the subjective feeling of wanting in humans is lacking.
Okay. The context, even of the conversation that we're having, is that dopamine seems to be associated with things that are quite superficially rewarding and perhaps not necessarily good for us. So we've talked about cigarettes, alcohol, video games, scrolling on social media. There are a few things that it feels like I should get more of a drive to do than I do. So the two I think about are exercise, which always makes me feel amazing after I've done it, and eating a healthy meal. And yet I seem to be drawn to sitting on the sofa eating a non-healthy meal. Why is my dopamine system not setting up my reward and motivation?
Why are you
better?
not wanting the things?
Why don't I want to do some exercise and eat a healthy meal?
Quite like that.
Because the brain is more than dopamine, you know. So there's a lot more going on in terms of what you are wanting to do, whether you're fatigued, what's happened in the day for you. You know, we've got this very, very complex nervous system with all sorts of other things that are impacting on what we do.
Am I right, though, that dopamine is in some way, I think we think of it as a sort of short-term thing about gratification rather than a sort of higher level planning and sort of deep reward thing. Is that right?
And I think I want to pull away from that. It's not the gratification, it's the pull towards getting something that you've learnt could be rewarding.
Masud, even though I think Chris is right that we're not using the idea of dopamine quite correctly when we say we can feel the dopamine, what we're feeling is not dopamine. Still, when people talk about a dopamine detox, I think what they're saying is they want to try and shift their life away from these superficially rewarding, artificially stimulating things. That feels like quite a good thing to do. Is there anything that suggests that giving that dopamine reward motivation system a bit of a break could be good for us?
So, one, I think the detox from these kinds of activities is important. Two, there's no evidence that you're detoxing from dopamine when you do this. Those are the key points, I think. So as I said, there's no reservoir of dopamine building up when you're doing more and more of this. So when you stop doing this, it's not as if this reservoir is going to go down slowly. It's important behaviorally to get away from doing these activities which engage you so much that you're not doing other things profitably. But it doesn't necessarily mean when you can get away from those, you know, if you schedule such that you only look at your phone for an hour a day, those things might be very good for you, but it isn't the case that we think that that's because dopamine levels are falling when you stop doing that.
You're neither addicted to dopamine, nor are you retraining your brain to be less susceptible to superficial rewards. It's not like if you put your phone away, you know, when you pick it up in a month's time, you'll go, oh, well, I'm no longer find this appealing.
This term addicted to dopamine, there is no evidence about being addicted to dopamine. We all have dopamine. Detoxing allows you to stop doing those things you shouldn't be doing if you don't want to do them. And there's no evidence that dopamine is the compound, the neurotransmitter, which is allowing you to detox.
Is it useful for people to describe their activities then in terms of this quite thinly evidenced neuroscience? Or should we ban the word dopamine on social media as I propose?
I don't want to ban anything. It's helpful to have that conversation about behaviour, like phone use, for example. All I'm saying is don't prop that up with fake neuroscience. So we should pull that back. We should debunk that stuff. And there is evidence, as I said, about dopamine being involved in reward, motivation, action, but it's not to the point where we can go, oh, the analogy is so strong that we can explain everyday behaviours.
Masud, one question we always ask our experts on What's Up Docs is how does your research, your expertise affect the way you live your daily life?
I think what I've got from that is the kinds of rewards you get in life. If they're just focused on one thing, they're very limited. So I get my kicks from accomplishing lots of things rather than one thing in a day. So for me, there are lots of little bits that I'd like to do. in a day. I don't do one thing.
That's an amazing answer, because we've had a listener write in. Alex has said they love a to-do list so they can tick things off and get that sweet, sweet dopamine hit. Now, they've almost got it right.
They have. It's lovely that he's getting, pleasure from ticking things off, but it's probably not the fact that he's getting a dopamine hit.
Okay, but at least accomplishing lots of things,
Good thing.
And if that helps him on his way, it sounds like he's getting a lot done.
Exactly.
Masud, thank you so much for joining us on WhatsApp Docs.
Pleasure.